For centuries, archaeologists believed tombs were built to protect the dead. But in some cases, what they found suggests something far more disturbing. Across Egypt, Siberia, Petra, and beyond, entire teams fell sick, vanished, lost their memories, or walked away in silence after opening places that were never meant to be touched. These were not random accidents. The pattern is too consistent, too precise, and too terrifying to ignore. Tonight, we're looking at 10 mysterious tombs that didn't just frighten archaeologists. They seemed to punish them. And by the end of this video, the real question may not be why these tombs were sealed, but why some people were so desperate to keep them buried. Top 1. The Tutankhamun death sequence. When Howard Carter stepped into the tomb of Tutankhamun in November 1922, it should have been remembered as one of the greatest archaeological triumphs in history. Deep in Egypt's Valley of the Kings, he had uncovered something the world almost never gets to see. A royal tomb left nearly intact, sealed for thousands of years, still holding the silence of an ancient civilization. But what entered the world with that discovery was not just treasure, wonder, or scientific glory. Almost immediately, it was fear. At first, the death that followed looked like a tragic coincidence. Lord Carnarvon, the wealthy aristocrat who financed the expedition, died only weeks after the tomb was opened. The official explanation was simple enough. A mosquito bite became infected, the infection worsened, and he was gone. But the timing was too perfect, too unnerving, and too impossible for the public to ignore. Newspapers across the world seized on the story and gave it a name that would outlive everyone involved: the Pharaoh's curse. That alone would have been enough to fuel superstition for decades. But Carnarvon was only the beginning. In the years that followed, more than 20 people linked in some direct way to the excavation were said to have died unexpectedly or suffered severe physical or mental collapse. These were not all elderly men already near death. They came from different countries, different professions, different states of health, and yet the pattern kept circling back to one chilling point of contact. They had all in some way crossed the threshold of Tutankhamun's burial world. Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, the radiologist who performed one of the first X-rays on the mummy, died not long afterward under mysterious circumstances. George J. Gould, the American magnate who visited the tomb, fell ill with a sudden fever and died within days. Arthur Mace, one of Carter's closest excavation associates, collapsed and never truly recovered. By the end of the decade, the list had grown long enough to blur the line between rumor and record. No single disease explained it. No clean medical pattern tied the victims together. It was as if the tomb did not kill in one predictable way. It simply reached people differently. And then there was the tomb itself. What Carter's team found inside was not merely a burial chamber rich with gold. It was a sealed environment layered with deliberate protection. Bitumen seals, golden amulets, objects designed not just for burial, but for warding off intruders. Among the treasures were meteoric iron daggers, ceremonial objects with unusual resistance to decay, and a scarab amulet associated with a warning that has echoed through popular imagination ever since. Death would come swiftly to the one who disturbed the king's peace. Skeptics have long tried to reduce the curse to biology. Decades later, tests reportedly found traces of mold species capable of producing dangerous mycotoxins. That theory sounds rational, even comforting. But it never fully explains what followed. The deaths were too scattered in time, too varied in effect, too inconsistent in symptoms. Exposure alone doesn't seem to account for the whole picture. Even stranger were the reports of subtle environmental anomalies. Low-frequency hums, irregular magnetic readings, concerns surrounding certain artifacts and their effects on museum staff. British authorities publicly brushed much of it aside as sensationalism, yet behind the scenes, pieces of the story appear to have grown harder to trace. Missing diaries, unpublished notes, redacted names, conflicting records. The deeper researchers looked, the more fragmented the history became. That may be the most disturbing part of all. Not simply that people died, but that the full chain of events became strangely difficult to reconstruct, as if the curse did not just target bodies. It targeted memory, records, and certainty itself. So what really happened after Tutankhamun's tomb was opened? Was it a sequence of coincidences magnified by fear? A biological hazard preserved for 3,000 years? Or something more deliberate, some ancient protective system we still don't understand? Because if so many lives unraveled after touching one buried chamber, what exactly was that tomb trying to keep out? Top 2. The Black Sarcophagus of Alexandria. In July 2018, what should have been a routine construction survey in Alexandria, Egypt, turned into one of the most unsettling archaeological discoveries in recent memory. Buried nearly 16 feet below an ordinary urban lot in the City-Gaber district, archaeologists uncovered a massive black granite sarcophagus unlike anything they had expected to find. It was enormous, untouched, and strangely anonymous. No royal markings, no decorative carvings, no clear identity, just a sealed stone coffin weighing more than 27 tons, sitting in silence beneath a modern city as if it had been hidden there on purpose. From the moment news of the discovery spread, the atmosphere around the sarcophagus felt wrong. Its sheer scale drew global attention, but so did the unease surrounding it. There was something unnerving about how intact it was, how featureless it appeared, and how little it seemed to want to reveal. Public warnings quickly followed, with many urging officials not to open it at all. But the team moved forward. The moment the seal was broken, the site was overwhelmed by something no one had expected. A foul red-brown liquid spilled out from inside the sarcophagus, carrying a stench so intense that several people on site reportedly vomited almost immediately. The smell was described as a mix of rot, metal, and long-sealed decay. Inside the fluid lay 3 heavily decomposed skeletons, stripped of clear identity, submerged in the dark residue with no inscriptions, no grave goods, and no evidence to explain who they were or why they had been buried in such an ominous way. At first, officials tried to reduce the event to something unpleasant but ordinary. The liquid, they suggested, may simply have been sewage that had seeped into the coffin over time. The bodies may have belonged to soldiers. The case, in public terms, was manageable, but the details that followed made that explanation feel less stable. The bones reportedly showed unusual erosion patterns and dark staining that didn't fit neatly into a simple decay narrative. Trace analysis of the fluid revealed elevated levels of metals like mercury and phosphorus, feeding speculation that the contents had been altered by something more than groundwater contamination. Toxicologists who reviewed samples reportedly found compounds that did not match a consistent environmental source, raising the uncomfortable possibility that whatever had collected inside the coffin had formed under highly unusual conditions. Then the physical reactions began. Within 48 hours, several people connected to the opening reported symptoms that were difficult to dismiss: migraines, nausea, severe fatigue. One technician claimed his vision blurred for days. A historian reportedly experienced vertigo that lasted for weeks. None of this proved a curse, of course, but the pattern was enough to reignite an old fear. That ancient tombs do not simply hold the dead. Sometimes they release something. And if the physical symptoms were not unsettling enough, the technological anomalies pushed the story even deeper into the unknown. Teams attempting to digitally scan the sarcophagus for hidden inscriptions or microetchings ran into repeated interference. Multiple scanning efforts reportedly returned distorted signals, particularly around the inner lid. A portable magnetic resonance analyzer shut down completely upon contact with the granite. Soon after, the museum that received the skeletal remains suffered a power outage, and its security system failed for hours. During that window, at least 2 artifacts allegedly disappeared, yet no formal report clarified exactly what had been lost. Around the neighborhood, rumors spread faster than official statements. Street animals were said to avoid the dig site. Nearby cell towers reportedly experienced irregular signal drops for several consecutive nights. Egyptian authorities eventually closed the case with a calm public assurance that all biological concerns had been addressed and the area was safe. Then, just as quickly as it had captured the world's attention, the story seemed to disappear. The sarcophagus was transferred quietly to storage in Cairo, no major follow-up was released, and members of the original team reportedly declined further interviews. That silence is what gives the Black Sarcophagus of Alexandria its lingering power. If it truly contained nothing more than sewage, decay, and misfortune, then why did so many details around it remain fractured, evasive, and unresolved? Why did the symptoms, signal failures, and quiet reassignment of the story feel less like closure and more like containment? And if the coffin held something designed not merely to preserve the dead, but to repel disturbance itself, then when that seal broke in 2018, what exactly was released into the open air? Top 3, the vanishing team in Mongolia. Some tombs leave behind sickness, some leave behind fear. But in the summer of 1997, one site in northern Mongolia appeared to leave behind something even more disturbing than either of those. It left behind nothing at all. The expedition was small, obscure, and almost unknown outside academic circles. Funded through a joint Mongolian-Russian Historical Institute, the team traveled into the Kovsgol region near the edge of Lake Kuvsgol, a cold and isolated glacial basin more than 5,000 feet above sea level. Satellite imagery had revealed geometric anomalies beneath a mound that, at first glance, looked natural. But the shapes below the surface suggested otherwise. 2 rectangular voids aligned with true north, clean structure beneath rough terrain, the kind of discovery archaeologists wait their entire careers to make. The excavation was led by Dr. Alexei Borodin, a Siberian archaeologist with experience in ancient burial grounds across the region. He arrived with 9 researchers and 2 local guides. Base camp was established on July 6th. By the 8th day, the team had already uncovered a formation of interlocking stone slabs, apparently marking the upper layer of a buried chamber. Everything about the site suggested they were on the edge of a major find. Then the reports began to shift. Communication logs sent back to their support team in Ulaanbaatar described a persistent hum rising from the excavation zone, along with compass readings that no longer behaved normally. Radio equipment experienced interference. Directions became unreliable. The site itself seemed to distort the instruments designed to measure it. Still, the team kept going. The final message ever received from Dr. Borodin's satellite phone was short, calm, and deeply unnerving. He reportedly said, "We are hearing something below. We'll attempt to access chamber before sunrise." That was the last transmission. When the support crew arrived 4 days later, they found the camp still standing. The tents were upright. Food supplies were untouched. Tools lay scattered around the open trench as if work had stopped in the middle of a sentence. But the people were gone, all 12 of them. No bodies, no tracks, no drag marks, no blood, no sign of struggle. It was as if the entire group had simply been removed from the landscape without disturbing it. That alone would have made the site one of the strangest disappearances in modern archaeological history. But the details at the scene made it even harder to explain away. Digital compasses recovered from the camp reportedly showed elevated magnetic readings. Radiation spikes were measured within a narrow radius around the trench itself. The excavation logbooks were missing. 2 digital cameras remained at the campsite, but their memory cards had been wiped clean. The physical evidence suggested activity had taken place. The absence of people suggested something had interrupted it. And the absence of records suggested someone, or something, had made sure the final moments would not be easily reconstructed. The Mongolian Ministry of Culture classified the event as an environmental mishap and sealed off the area. Soon after, a temporary military post was established near the mound, officially to protect the region under wildlife restrictions. Unofficially, that explanation convinced almost no one. Russian authorities made no public comment. Borodin's name reportedly began disappearing from certain university records and publication references, as though the state preferred the expedition itself to fade out along with the team. Then came the local reports. Herders in the surrounding region claimed they saw military helicopters circling the site in the weeks that followed. Some alleged that sealed boxes were airlifted out of the trench, wrapped in lead foil. Years later, fringe sources began circulating unverified claims that a camera recovered from the camp contained footage of a descending stone passage, illuminated by carvings that glowed in the dark. Another account described a motionless, human-like figure standing deep inside the chamber, its eyes reflecting light like an animal predator. None of those stories were ever authenticated, and that only deepened the divide between official denial and whispered speculation. Perhaps the most unsettling detail emerged much later, when a French satellite hobbyist reportedly compared archival images of the mound from 1995 to 2005 and concluded that its dimensions had subtly changed over time. That could have been explained by natural subsidence, or it could have meant something beneath the surface had shifted after the dig. That possibility changes everything, because if the site near Lake Kuvsgul was simply an unstable burial mound, then 12 trained people somehow vanished into empty air without leaving a trace. But if it was something else, something sealed not to honor the dead, but to contain movement, sound, or passage, then the team may not have opened a tomb at all. They may have opened a threshold. And if that's true, when Dr. Borodin said they were hearing something below, what exactly was listening from the other side? Top 4, the shifting tomb of Peru. There are tombs that threaten the body, and there are tombs that seem to reach directly for the mind. In May of 2003, near the outer edge of Peru's Nazca Plateau, a team of archaeologists may have encountered something far more dangerous than a sealed burial chamber. They may have stepped into a place that did not obey stable reality at all. The site lay beneath an isolated ridge, known locally as Terro Blanco Muerto, in a region already surrounded by mystery because of the giant Nazca geoglyphs carved into the desert floor. But this discovery had nothing to do with the famous lines visible from the sky. What drew attention this time was beneath the earth. Ground-penetrating radar had identified a void roughly 22 feet below the surface, rectangular in form, unnaturally symmetrical, and too deliberate to dismiss as a natural cavity. To archaeologists, it looked like a hidden structure. To some, it looked like an invitation. To others, even before it was opened, it looked like a warning. On the morning of May 17th, the team breached the outer layer of what they believed was a stone-lined tomb. From that point on, the case stopped behaving like archaeology and started sounding like a breakdown in human perception itself. According to the testimonies later given to the National Institute of Culture in Lima, the moment the core team entered the chamber, their sense of space began to fracture. 4 members, including expedition leader Dr. Clara Huaman, emerged describing the same interior as if they had entered 4 entirely different places. One said the walls were lined in gold and ancient bones arranged in star-like formations. Another insisted the chamber was swallowed in absolute darkness, with a floor that somehow reflected the sky. A third said she was standing in shallow water while hearing whispers in Quechua. The fourth reported walls covered in pulsating symbols that seemed to vanish when he tried to approach them. These statements were not collected days later after memory had time to drift. They were recorded within minutes while the witnesses were still shaken and insisting with total certainty that what they saw was real. That detail matters. This was not ordinary confusion. It was simultaneous contradiction, delivered with absolute conviction. And the chamber itself seemed to support the impossibility. The equipment brought inside quickly failed to behave in any rational way. The team's laser measuring device produced dimensions that changed depending on direction. One wall measured 14 feet while approached, but 19 feet while retreating. Infrared imaging returned only black voids, as if the chamber refused to reflect usable thermal information. Sound recorders captured a low-frequency tone, repeating in 5-second intervals, steady and mechanical enough to feel intentional. When a technician attempted to calibrate a magnetic compass in the chamber, the needle spun continuously without settling. Outside the tomb, the air was still. Inside, multiple team members described intense chest pressure and the overwhelming sensation of being watched. By the 3rd day, the expedition was collapsing under the strain. 2 researchers suffered severe disorientation and had to be evacuated. One of them, an assistant named Rodrigo Escal, reportedly began speaking in reversed syllables that linguists could not connect to any known language. He was later committed to psychiatric care and never returned to fieldwork. More disturbing still, his CAT scan allegedly showed abnormal neural activity in the pineal region of the brain, the kind of activity more often associated with extreme altered states or near-death experiences. At that point, the Peruvian government stepped in. The official reason was geological instability and heritage protection. But that explanation feels thinner the deeper the story goes. The site was placed under military lockdown. Public satellite imagery of the area was downgraded. Academic journals that initially showed interest backed away, citing a lack of verifiable data. The tomb itself was reburied beneath layers of concrete and gravel, sealing it back into the earth as if the priority was no longer excavation, but containment. Years later, an alleged leaked memo from the Peruvian Ministry of Defense referred to the chamber as an anomalous cognitive structure and warned that prolonged exposure could lead to irreversible perception breakdown. If that document was genuine, then this was never just a burial site. It was something engineered to destabilize the human mind, a structure that defended itself not with traps or poison, but by attacking certainty itself. That is what makes the shifting tomb of Peru so terrifying. It doesn't simply threaten those who enter. It seems to make truth itself inaccessible. If every witness sees a different chamber, if every instrument reports a different reality, and if the site can't be studied without warping the minds of the people inside it, then what exactly was built beneath that desert ridge? And more importantly, what kind of civilization knew how to design a tomb that could fracture perception before anyone ever reached its center? Top 5. The radiation tomb in Siberia. If the tomb in Peru seemed to attack perception, the next site appeared to do something even more concrete. It attacked the human body itself. In September 1987, deep in the remote Yamal-Nenets region of northern Siberia, a Soviet geological survey detected something that should not have been there at all: an abnormally high radiation signature rising from a stone mound beside a glacier-fed river bend known only as Site K29. At first, officials assumed they were dealing with the aftermath of Cold War military activity. In that era, unexplained radiation in a remote Siberian landscape naturally pointed toward weapons testing, buried waste, or some classified Soviet operation. But the pattern quickly became harder to explain. The radiation wasn't spread across the terrain in any normal way. It was narrowly concentrated, confined to a circular mound about 30 feet across, as though the Earth itself had been shaped around a single dangerous object. When archaeologists were brought in, they made a different identification. The mound appeared to be a Bronze Age burial structure, likely a kurgan associated with the Akhanev culture. That should have lowered the temperature of the case. Instead, it made everything worse. Because if the source of that radiation was truly ancient, then something impossible had been buried there thousands of years before the modern world even understood what radiation was. Despite warnings from specialists, the mound was opened. At roughly 6 feet down, the team breached a stone-lined chamber. Inside, they found no skeleton laid out with ornaments, no ceremonial offerings, no familiar burial arrangement. Instead, there was a single object resting within the chamber, a sarcophagus-shaped structure made from a metallic alloy that could not be matched to known Soviet material databases. The object was cold to the touch, even though the surrounding ground was above freezing. More disturbing still, it emitted measurable low-level gamma radiation up to 12 feet away. One geologist moved in for a closer inspection and touched the object directly. He collapsed almost immediately. He later died of acute organ failure. That should have been enough to stop the operation cold. But the exposure had already spread through the team. Within 2 weeks, 2 more researchers involved in the excavation were hospitalized with symptoms resembling radiation poisoning: vomiting, skin lesions, and a rapid collapse in white blood cell count. According to the reports, none of them had spent more than 10 minutes near the object. That detail is what makes the case so unsettling. These were not men standing for hours in an exposed reactor core. Their contact was brief, limited, and yet the damage was severe. The object was soon transferred under heavy containment. Airlifted in a sealed transport unit to a research facility near Novosibirsk, it was stripped of any descriptive label and renamed with bureaucratic coldness: Object 87K. That is where the case moved from archaeology into something closer to classified panic. Leaked internal memos from the Academy of Sciences, which surfaced years later, describe repeated attempts to penetrate or analyze the object. Industrial drills failed. High-frequency lasers failed. The surface absorbed thermal input instead of reacting to it. Every scan, including X-ray and ultrasound, failed to reveal anything inside. It was a container with no readable interior, a metallic shell that resisted both force and vision. And then there was the sound. Technicians reported that the object emitted a continuous low hum at roughly 17.4 hertz, a frequency often associated with visual unease, anxiety, and even hallucination in humans. In controlled environments, low frequencies in that range can create dread without any visible cause. In the Siberian tomb, that hum was constant, stable, and inexplicable. Soon the health effects widened. Lab equipment malfunctioned without warning. Hard drives reportedly erased themselves during data transfer. Then members of the analysis team began getting sick. One physicist went blind overnight. Another developed a brain tumor despite no known risk profile. At some point, the object was no longer treated like an artifact. It was treated like a threat. Eventually, Object 87K was sealed inside a lead-lined vault beneath the facility and formally designated cognitively toxic. No public scientific paper was ever released. The Soviet Defense Ministry classified the project, and when the USSR collapsed a few years later, much of the record surrounding Site K-29 dissolved into the confusion of a dying state. But the story did not disappear entirely. In 2014, a declassified military satellite image reportedly showed renewed construction at the same coordinates, implying the site may have been revisited, monitored, or reopened. No explanation followed. Local Nenets herders, meanwhile, continued to avoid the area and referred to it in whispers as the hill that burns without fire. That phrase may be the most haunting summary of the entire case, because if that metallic object truly came from a Bronze Age burial mound, then it predates every known framework of nuclear science and advanced metallurgy. If it was newer, then someone hid it under ancient stone and earth with the deliberate intention that it would never be found. Either explanation points in the same direction. This was not something placed in a tomb for honor. It was placed there for isolation. So what was buried inside that Siberian mound? A forgotten technology? A weapon? A containment vessel? And if the ground had to be used as its final shield, what kind of danger did ancient or modern hands believe was still active inside it? Top 6. The Armenian Signal Disruption. By the time archaeologists reached northern Armenia in October 2009, they believed they were walking into a burial survey. What they may actually have walked into was a structure that did not just resist discovery, but actively interfered with the tools modern civilization depends on to describe reality. The expedition was organized by an interdisciplinary team from Yerevan State University, bringing together archaeologists and electrical engineers to examine possible pre-Christian burial sites in the Aragats mountain region. The area had drawn attention because of old Soviet-era aerial photographs showing circular stone anomalies in the landscape. One site near the Kasag River Valley stood out immediately. At more than 6,200 feet above sea level, it showed a perfectly circular outer outline and an unusually symmetrical inner ring, features too precise to dismiss as random geology. The team selected it for immediate excavation, expecting a Bronze Age tomb. Instead, almost from the first hour of digging, they encountered something far stranger. The first signs did not come from the earth itself. They came from the failure of the systems surrounding it. Wireless equipment began breaking down within roughly 60 feet of the site. Walkie-talkies dissolved into constant static. GPS units lost satellite lock. Drone cameras either crashed outright or returned blank feeds. At first, the researchers tried to explain it away. Software issues, interference, solar conditions. The usual modern excuses people reach for when machines stop making sense. But when shielded replacement equipment failed in exactly the same way, that explanation started to collapse. The moment the anomaly became impossible to dismiss came during an attempted live stream of a basic survey video. The transmission came back distorted with sudden bursts of pixelation, black frames, and fragments of audio containing reverse syllables mixed with low, growling frequencies. Even more disturbing, the same corrupted file produced different errors when played back on different computers. It was as if the problem was no longer in the camera or the signal. It was in the information itself, and that was only outside the chamber. Inside the burial structure, the central space appeared almost aggressively plain, a smooth basalt-lined floor, a square stone sarcophagus with no carvings and no inscriptions. One corner of the lid had fractured, revealing a hollow cavity beyond. Yet what lay inside that opening was not visible in any normal sense. Every witness described it the same way. a darkness deeper than flashlight beams could penetrate, as if the light itself was being swallowed before it could return. The team lowered a digital probe into the cavity, hoping to capture internal footage and at least establish dimensions. The feed cut out immediately. The cable then stiffened unnaturally and had to be physically forced back out. Within minutes, the laptop connected to the probe overheated and shut down permanently. When technicians examined the final frame, they found strange magnetic imprints resembling primitive runic symbols, yet none could be matched to known regional scripts. By the second day, the anomalies had moved beyond hardware. Researchers standing near the structure reported headaches, confusion, and intense ringing in the ears. One assistant collapsed after saying he could hear singing inside the stone. Another began compulsively drawing concentric spirals for no identifiable reason. Nearby seismometers, placed to monitor underground movement, began registering rhythmic pulses every 5 minutes with machine-like precision, a pattern unknown in local geology and impossible to explain through ordinary earth movement. At that point, the Armenian government was notified. A containment team from the Ministry of Emergency Situations arrived, and by the end of the week, the site had been sealed. All equipment was confiscated. The official explanation blamed underground mineral concentrations for the interference, but that account never fully matched the scale or behavior of the anomaly. Later leaked internal reports suggested something far more disturbing. According to those documents, the tomb was producing a persistent electromagnetic field at frequencies capable of affecting hardware performance, memory, and human perception at the same time. The phrase used was chillingly clinical: informational contamination. Not poison, not radiation, not superstition, contamination of information itself. After that, the site effectively vanished from public archaeology. It no longer appeared on open registries. Satellite access to its coordinates became blurred or outdated. Members of the original research team were reassigned, withdrew from academia, or stopped discussing the case entirely. Years later, one researcher, Dr. Lilit Manukhan, speaking anonymously, claimed she continued to experience recurring dreams of what she described only as a voice encoded in light. That phrase stays with you because it suggests something more than interference. It suggests intention. If the Armenian tomb was built to disrupt recording, distort memory, and degrade perception, then it may have been doing exactly what it was designed to do. Not protecting treasure, not honoring the dead, but preventing itself from being captured, translated, or even fully remembered. So what exactly was hidden inside that basalt chamber? And what kind of intelligence designs a tomb that doesn't just reject intruders, but begins erasing the evidence of its own existence the moment it is observed? Top 7, the Celtic stone tomb. Some tombs are feared because they kill, others are feared because they wound the mind. But the Celtic stone tomb discovered in northeastern France carried a different kind of terror altogether. According to the accounts that survived, this was not a place that merely frightened those who entered it. It was a place that appeared to erase them from within. The site was rediscovered in the spring of 1984 in the remote Arden region, after researchers traced references to a lost Celtic burial mound originally noted by Napoleonic cartographers more than a century earlier. The location itself already felt unusual. An overgrown forest, a raised earthen mound more than 15 feet high, concentric rings of ancient trees surrounding the site like a natural boundary, trees the locals called kinapar, the wood that does not speak. Beneath that silence, preliminary magnetometry scans revealed a hidden chamber built from massive monolithic slabs of quartzite. At first, the discovery looked like a rare and valuable archaeological opportunity. The tomb appeared undisturbed, no visible looting, no collapsed entrance, no evidence that anyone in the modern era had breached it. But by the end of the excavation, the site would be buried again, not to preserve it for study, but because the people involved had begun to fear what it was doing to the living. The turning point came on May 3rd. Dr. Henrik Vololtz, a veteran archaeologist and linguist with years of field experience, entered the chamber alone for a preliminary documentation pass. He was expected to remain inside for only a short time. Instead, roughly 20 minutes later, his colleagues found him wandering through the forest half a mile away, barefoot, unresponsive, and unable to remember his own name. That alone would have been extraordinary. But everything that followed made it much worse. Vololtz had no visible injuries, no sign of a fall, no head wound, no physical trauma. He had no known history of psychiatric illness, and yet the evaluations that followed suggested something almost impossible. His memory had not merely been damaged or suppressed. According to the language used later in the case, it had been erased. He could still speak several languages fluently, which meant his brain retained vast amounts of learned structure. But he could no longer recall the alphabet. He recognized architectural forms, but not his own handwriting. It was as if broad systems of knowledge had survived while the pathways connecting them to personal continuity had been severed. MRI scans reportedly deepened the mystery. Neurologists found unusual patterns of neural activity, including an abnormal reduction in hippocampal function that they struggled to explain through ordinary trauma, stroke, or disease. Something had happened to him inside that chamber, and whatever it was did not behave like conventional injury. Then the team looked more closely at the tomb itself. Inside, the walls were lined with polished quartz slabs of unusually high silica content, each one mirror-like in finish and astonishingly well-preserved despite their age. The chamber was nearly pristine. No dust, no mold, no insect life, no ordinary signs of slow decay. It looked less like an ancient grave and more like a sealed environment preserved in suspension. At the center stood a carved stone plinth supporting an obsidian tablet roughly the size of a human torso. Witnesses described its surface as shimmering with prismatic distortions, resisting focus whenever light struck it directly. Attempts to document that tablet only intensified the fear. Photographs came back corrupted, blank, or reduced to cascading error patterns. A technician assigned to sketch the carvings produced nothing but chaotic lines and later could not remember making them. Another researcher wrote a 7-page report in a script no one recognized. Linguists later noted faint similarities to early Celtic Ogham, but the arrangement made no phonetic sense. It was writing that resembled language while refusing to behave like language. Then the symptoms spread. Other members of the team began reporting nausea, disorientation, and vivid waking dreams they described as silent conversations with something unseen. These were not dramatic claims made years later. They were immediate reactions from trained professionals who had walked into the site expecting stone, structure, and burial ritual, not the collapse of memory and cognition. By May 6th, the excavation was effectively over. The lead coordinator received a direct order from the French Ministry of Culture to halt all activity and reseal the site. No public explanation was offered. Within days, the mound was covered in reinforced concrete and redesignated as protected heritage ground. As of 2024, no new excavation has been authorized. That decision says everything. Because if this had been a simple medical event, the site would have remained an object of study. Instead, it was buried again, as though exposure itself posed a risk. And that is what makes the Celtic stone tomb so deeply unsettling. It did not appear to attack intruders with poison, collapse, or visible force. It seemed to attack memory, language, and mental continuity, the very tools humans rely on to carry knowledge forward. So what was that chamber built to protect? A body? An object? A message? Or something even more dangerous? An idea so destructive that anyone who encountered it directly had to be broken before they could carry it back into the world. Top 8. The Tomb of the Screaming Woman. By the time the team working near the ancient city of Mari uncovered the limestone sarcophagus in August 2011, they believed they were dealing with a difficult but manageable salvage excavation. The area in eastern Syria had long been considered unstable because of flood erosion and structural collapse near an old ziggurat foundation. What satellite imaging revealed beneath that damaged landscape, however, was a sealed subterranean vault no one had expected to find. And once the sarcophagus inside it was opened, the excavation stopped being a scientific event and became something far harder to explain. At first glance, the coffin looked almost disappointingly plain. It was a 7-foot block of smooth limestone with no inscription, no carved figures, and no visible marks of status. That simplicity only made the details around it more unsettling. The lid had been sealed with a form of bitumen unlike any standard material previously recorded in the region, and the stone itself showed signs of artificial weathering even though it had been protected underground. In other words, the sarcophagus looked old, but it also looked intentionally altered, as though someone had wanted it to age in a very specific way. Then came the moment the seal was broken. According to every account that later leaked from the site, the instant the lid was lifted, every person present heard the same thing. The unmistakable scream of a woman. It was not vague. It was not ambient noise. It was not the groan of stone or air pressure escaping from a sealed chamber. Witnesses described it as a human cry with depth, direction, and emotional intensity. It lasted for about 4 seconds, then stopped abruptly. No recording equipment had been running at the exact moment of opening, and when devices were checked afterward, 2 of them had been found permanently corrupted. That alone would have turned the tomb into one of the strangest archaeological cases on record. But the contents of the sarcophagus made the story even darker. Inside lay the remains of a single woman curled into a fetal position, her hands pressed over her ears, as if she had died trying to shut something out. Her jaw was open far wider than expected in normal skeletal collapse. More disturbing still, examination of the skull reportedly revealed microfractures along the auditory canal and cranial sutures, injuries consistent with prolonged exposure to intense, low-frequency vibration. Carbon dating placed her death around 1800 BCE, yet tissue remnants near the inner ear appeared unnaturally preserved, as though that area had been altered by heat, chemicals, or some process not easily explained by ordinary burial conditions. For a brief period after the opening, the atmosphere around the sarcophagus reportedly changed in measurable ways. The local team physician documented a sudden drop in ambient temperature of more than 12 degrees, despite the sealed tent and the punishing heat outside, which was said to be above 95 degrees. The cold lingered for nearly 2 hours. No conventional explanation fully accounted for the shift. Then came the collapse of Dr. Al Messier, an acoustic specialist assisting the team with structural scans. After hearing the scream, he reportedly suffered a seizure and began speaking in an archaic form of Akkadian that only one colleague could partially understand. The phrases attributed to him were chilling: the mother who cannot die, and the breath that binds silence. Soon afterward, he was evacuated to a hospital in Damascus. Then, according to later claims, he vanished from official records entirely. His family reportedly said he had been transferred to a military facility and cut off from communication. At that point, the excavation was effectively over. The Syrian Directorate General of Antiquities and Museums closed the site, citing geotechnical instability. All materials were confiscated. No formal documentation was released publicly. What survived came through leaked emails, secondhand testimony, and whispers among professionals who had been close enough to the event to know that something had gone very wrong. Some speculated that the scream had been a preserved acoustic event, a sound trap encoded into the structure and released when the seal was broken. Others suggested some kind of ancient frequency-based containment system, something designed to trigger nausea, fear, or neurological shock in the moment of intrusion. That idea sounds absurd until you remember the details: the preserved inner ear tissue, the cranial damage, the synchronized witness testimony, the corrupted devices, the temperature drop, the specialist who collapsed into a language that should not have been living inside his mind. If the sound truly came from the tomb itself, then someone in the ancient world engineered a voice to survive nearly 38 centuries and release itself at the exact moment the dead were disturbed. And if the scream did not come from the remains inside, then the implications are somehow even worse, because that would mean there was no physical source at all. So what was really sealed inside the tomb of the screaming woman? A body shaped by an acoustic weapon? A chamber built to preserve one final warning? Or evidence that some civilizations understood how to trap sound, memory, and terror together in stone, waiting for the right moment to be heard again? Top 9. The Cursed Vault in Petra. Few places in the ancient world carry the same kind of visual power as Petra. Carved directly into rose-colored sandstone cliffs, the city has long been celebrated for its monumental facades, hidden passageways, and the sense that entire histories are sleeping just beyond the stone. But in the spring of 1992, a joint Jordanian-Italian archaeological team went looking beyond the famous landmarks and found something Petra seemed determined not to give up. Deep in the lesser-explored southern canyons, local oral tradition had preserved whispers of a sealed chamber known as Bab al-Kufiyah, the hidden gate. Unlike Petra's more familiar tombs, this chamber had never been properly entered, documented, or opened. The reason, according to the story surrounding it, was not difficulty. It was consequence. Every serious attempt to breach it had ended in disaster. The entrance itself already felt wrong. Set behind a naturally eroded overhang, the stone face bore no inscriptions, no decorative motifs, no visible clue to the identity of whoever or whatever lay behind it. There was only a perfectly concave indentation in the rock, measuring exactly 18 inches across and filled with hardened mineral deposits, as though something once fit there with unnatural precision. It did not look like ornament, it looked like a mechanism. And mechanisms raise a different kind of fear, because they suggest design. The chamber had a history even before the 1992 expedition arrived. In 1909, a British explorer named Charles F. Forrester reportedly tried to drill through the rock and died days later of a cerebral hemorrhage. In 1958, a Jordanian team attempted to breach the perimeter using industrial chisels, only for the effort to end after sudden equipment malfunctions injured 2 workers. By the time the modern survey began, the vault already carried the reputation of a place that fought back. Still, the team moved forward. Armed with advanced imaging equipment and vibration scanners, the archaeologists and engineers hoped to do what earlier expeditions could not: understand the chamber without forcing entry. But within minutes of the survey beginning, the failures started. Ground-penetrating radar units shut down with corrupted readings. Power supplies surged and destroyed a primary voltage regulator. The team's only functioning camera captured just 3 frames before its internal lens cracked under no visible external pressure. It was as if the vault did not merely resist intrusion, it seemed to reject observation itself. Then the effects became personal. One of the engineers working with vibration sensors reportedly collapsed after describing a metallic ringing inside his head. Later, he said he had experienced a vision of 1,000 small mouths whispering from the stone. That detail is hard to forget because it sits right on the edge between hallucination and testimony. He did not describe a shadow, a ghost, or a simple wave of dizziness. He described language without words, voices without bodies. A structure that seemed alive with something trying to speak without being understood. The project was suspended almost immediately. Subsequent investigations by Jordan's Department of Antiquities offered no clear resolution. Density tests suggested a hollow cavity behind the wall, roughly 12 feet wide and 10 feet high, but every effort to move closer to actual entry triggered more failure. The deeper the team tried to understand the space, the less cooperative reality seemed to become. Instruments malfunctioned. Visual data broke apart. Geometry became harder to trust. In a leaked debriefing later referenced in an Italian academic source, the vault was described as electromagnetically volatile and unresponsive to traditional architectural principles. That phrase is worth sitting with for a moment. Unresponsive to traditional architectural principles. In other words, the chamber did not behave like a normal human-built room. It behaved like something designed around rules the investigators could not properly map. And the resistance did not end in 1992. The vault remains sealed to this day. Despite centuries of exposure to wind, sand, and desert heat, the stone face shows no meaningful erosion or structural instability. Local guides avoid the site. Paths leading to it are rarely emphasized on maps. Researchers attempting indirect digital reconstructions have reported warped dimensions, false shadows, and alignment errors that make the chamber feel almost impossible to model consistently. In 2017, an independent drone survey attempted to capture high-resolution imagery of the area. The drone lost control and crashed into the ravine. When the onboard data was recovered, all footage of the vault itself was blank. That final detail may be the most unnerving of all. You can accept a failed drill. You can explain away a damaged lens. You can even dismiss individual fear responses as stress. But when decades pass and the pattern keeps repeating across different technologies, different teams, and different generations, the story stops sounding like bad luck. It starts sounding like a system. So what is the cursed vault in Petra really guarding? A body, a relic, a machine, or something more dangerous than any object? Something that can't be allowed into language, image, or public memory? Because if that sandstone wall has resisted not just force, but knowledge for more than a century, then maybe the true mystery isn't what lies inside it. Maybe the real mystery is why Petra still seems to know it should remain closed. Top 10. The Burial Pit of Saqqara. By the time conservators began routine restoration work at the Saqqara necropolis in November 2006, no one expected to uncover one of the most disturbing anomalies in the entire chain of cursed tomb accounts. Saqqara, just south of Cairo, is one of the oldest and most archaeologically dense burial landscapes on Earth. It is famous for the Step Pyramid of Djoser, for its shafts, chambers, and sealed passages layered across centuries of Egyptian death ritual. In a place already saturated with history, it takes something extraordinary to stand out. What the team found beneath a forgotten storage crypt was exactly that. Hidden below centuries of sand and debris, the workers uncovered a sealed stone slab that did not match any known architectural layout in the area. Beneath it was a narrow staircase descending into total darkness. It was not part of the mapped complex. It did not align with the expected burial geometry. It looked less like an extension of the necropolis and more like something inserted into it, something concealed inside a place already designed to hide the dead. According to internal memos later leaked in 2010, a small team of 6 archaeologists and support staff entered the chamber on the evening of November 16th. What they found below was not a conventional tomb. At the bottom of the staircase lay a perfectly circular burial pit carved directly into bedrock, nearly 20 feet across. In the center stood a raised diorite platform supporting a large lidless sarcophagus carved from a single block of black alabaster. There were no inscriptions, no funerary offerings, no visible remains, just an open cavity and a heavy, stagnant atmosphere so dense that several members of the team reportedly became dizzy almost immediately. That absence is what makes the Saqqara case so frightening. Most ancient burial sites, no matter how damaged, still communicate something: a name, a status marker, a ritual pattern, a body. This chamber communicated almost nothing at all. It was a void arranged with the precision of ceremony, but with none of the explanation. Then the acoustic effects began. Notes from the team, later redacted in official summaries, described a bizarre auditory distortion inside the chamber. Ordinary speech did not echo normally. Voices returned with a delay of more than 2 seconds and came back tonally altered, as though stretched or slowed by something in the pit itself. Sound recorders brought in to document the interior reportedly captured only looping static embedded with tones that matched no known environmental frequency. One researcher, while attempting to map the chamber's dimensions, collapsed and later claimed he had heard a second heartbeat beneath the sarcophagus, not his own, but something pulsing from below the stone. That would already have been enough to halt most excavations, but the most disturbing reaction came from the team leader, Dr. Nadim al-Hakim, a respected Egyptologist with a strong professional reputation. After entering the chamber alone for a solo photographic session, he emerged 27 minutes later, pale, shaken, and almost completely silent. He refused to describe what he had seen. He did not brief his team. He did not speculate. He simply left the site later that night without informing anyone. He was never seen publicly again. A week later, his resignation letter arrived typed but unsigned. It contained only one sentence: "I've seen what I was not meant to see. We must not open what was sealed before language." That line may be the single most chilling statement in the entire transcript of cursed tomb accounts, because it suggests the chamber was not merely ancient. It was primordial in intention. Something older than inscription, older than naming, something sealed before humans had words for what they feared. Soon after, all work in the southern sector of Saqqara stopped. The entrance to the pit was filled and sealed with poured concrete under the official explanation of structural preservation. No public statement clarified what had been found. Requests for access were denied. References to the chamber reportedly disappeared from excavation logs. Researchers later trying to triangulate the site through maps and satellite data noticed strange inconsistencies, with imagery blurring over the likely location and map alignments drifting by several feet depending on the source. Among regional guides, the chamber allegedly became known in whispers as Al-Majur al-Maskut, the silence compulsion. That name matters because it implies something beyond fear, not just danger, but an active pressure, a pull, a force that draws attention while simultaneously forbidding contact. And that may be what makes the burial pit of Saqqara the most unsettling tomb in the entire list. It does not give investigators a body, a curse inscription, or even a clear artifact to interpret. It gives them an empty sarcophagus, warped acoustics, a missing scholar, and a final warning written by a man who never returned to public life. If the chamber held no remains, then what was it built for? If it contained nothing, then why did it provoke such complete silence? And if Dr. Al-Hakim truly saw something that should never have been witnessed, what exactly was waiting in that pit beneath Saqqara? Something buried or something still awake? These 10 tombs, scattered across continents, cultures, and centuries, all seem to point toward the same terrifying possibility. These were not just graves, they were systems. Systems built to punish intrusion, distort perception, erase evidence, and silence those who got too close. Across every case, the pattern repeats: unexplained illness, memory loss, corrupted data, vanished records, sealed sites, and careers that ended the moment the truth came into view. Maybe these chambers were never meant to preserve the dead. Maybe they were built to contain something far more dangerous than death itself. And if that's true, then the most chilling part is this: whatever was sealed inside may still be there. Still waiting, still listening. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments which of these tombs disturbed you the most. Because the deeper we dig into the past, the more it begins to feel like the past was trying to warn us away.